Hi, I'm Gail. Thank you so much for joining me on the Secular Scriptures for a reading of Genesis chapters 12 to 15, a close family road trip from the World English Bible, a free public domain translation of the Bible, without which this study would not be possible. I'm not a biblical scholar, which will be evident as soon as I start mispronouncing names and places, but I do love these stories. If you just came for the reading and don't want to hang around for the discussion, you can use the timestamps in the description box below, and I will see you next time. But if you'd like to stay for some history, literary analysis, comparative mythology, and conflicts, contradictions, and controversies, you are most welcome. As my honored guest, I'd love to offer you some bread and barbecue, but this is the internet that unfortunately makes it difficult to share food. This is a secular Bible study, so let there be no strife between us, nor proselytizing, nor apologetics. Discussion is welcome, waging battle in the comments is not. Different translations say different things, so please list the translation you are using if or when you quote a passage. No disparaging someone's preferred book. I prefer the NRSV, but it is copyrighted. And keep it on topic, though with this one, please feel free to pull from later biblical sources because it's relevant to the themes and patterns that we will discuss. So, go grab your favorite beverage and let's journey into the promised land of this story. This is Genesis chapter 12. Now Yahweh said to Abram, "Leave your country and your relatives and your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who treats you with contempt. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went as Yahweh had told him. Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took Sarai his wife, Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran. And they went into the land of Canaan. They entered into the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time Canaanites were in the land. Yahweh appeared to Abram and said, "I will give this land to your offspring." He built an altar there to Yahweh, who had appeared to him. He left from there to go to the mountain on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to Yahweh and called on Yahweh's name. Abram traveled, still going on toward the south. There was a famine in the land. Abram went down into Egypt to live as a foreigner there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he had come near to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, "See now, I know that you are a beautiful woman to look at. It will happen that when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' They will kill me, but they will save you alive. Please say that you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that my soul may live because of you." When Abram had come into Egypt, some Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. He dealt well with Abram for her sake. He had sheep, cattle, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. Yahweh afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this that you have done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so that I took her to be my wife? Now, therefore, see your wife, take her, and go your way." Pharaoh commanded men concerning him, and they escorted him away with his wife and all that he had. Genesis chapter 13. Abram went up out of Egypt, he, his wife, all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. He went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there at first. There Abram called on Yahweh's name. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks, herds, and tents. The land was not able to bear them that they might live together, for their possessions were so great that they couldn't live together. There was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites lived in the land at that time. Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are relatives. Isn't the whole land before you? Please separate yourself from me. If you go to the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right hand, I will go to the left." Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before Yahweh destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of Yahweh, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose the plain of the Jordan for himself. Lot traveled east, and they separated themselves from one another. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, and Lot lived in the cities of the plain, and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinners against Yahweh. Yahweh said to Abram after Lot was separated from him, "Now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are northward and southward and eastward and westward, for I will give all the land which you see to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can count the dust of the earth, then your offspring may also be counted. Arise, walk through the land in its length and its width, for I will give it to you." Abram moved his tent and came and lived by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to Yahweh. In the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goim, they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemember, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, also called Zoar. All these joined together in the valley of Siddim, also called the Salt Sea. They served Chedorlaomer for 12 years, and in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him came and struck the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karanaim, the Zuzim in Ham, the Emim in Sheva Kerathanim, and the Horites in their Mount Seir to El Paran, which is by the wilderness. They returned and came to En Mishpat, also called Kadesh, and struck all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites that lived in Hazan Tamar. The king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and the king of Admah and the king of Zeboim and the king of Bela, also called Zoar, went out, and they set the battle in array against them in the valley of Siddim, against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goim, Amphrael, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings against the 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and the kings of Sodom, the king of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and some fell there. Those who remained fled to the hills. They took all of the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food and went their way. They took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who lived in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. One who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew. At that time he lived by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner. They were the allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his relative was taken captive, he led out 318 trained men born in his house and pursued as far as Dan. He divided himself against them by night, he and his servants, and struck them, and pursued them to Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. He brought back all the goods, and also brought back his relative Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the other people. the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and the kings who were with him at the valley of Shaveh, that is, the king's valley. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. He blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of the heaven and earth. Blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. Abram gave him a tenth of all. The king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the people, and take the goods for yourself. Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hand to Yahweh, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take a thread nor a sandal strap nor anything that is yours, lest you say, I have made Abram rich. I will accept nothing from you except that which the young men have eaten, the portion of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their portion. After these things, Yahweh's word came to Abram in a vision, saying, Don't be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward. Abram said, Lord Yahweh, what will you give me, since I go childless, and he who will inherit my estate is Eleazar of Damascus? Abram said, Behold, you have given no children to me, and behold, one born in my house is my heir. Behold, Yahweh's word came to him, saying, This man will not be your heir, but he who will come out of your own body will be your heir. Yahweh brought him outside and said, Look now towards the sky, and count the stars, if you are able to count them. He said to Abram, So your offspring will be. He believed in Yahweh, who credited it to him for righteousness. He said to Abram, I am Yahweh, who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldees, to give you this land to inherit it. He said, Lord Yahweh, how will I know that I will inherit it? He said to him, Bring me a heifer 3 years old, and a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. He brought him all these, and divided them in the middle, and laid each half opposite the other, but he didn't divide the birds. The birds of prey came down on the carcasses, and Abram drove them away. When the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram. Now terror and great darkness fell on him. He said to Abram, Know for sure that your offspring will live as foreigners in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them. They will afflict them 400 years. I will also judge that nation whom they will serve. Afterward they will come out with great wealth. But you will go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation they will come here again, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet full. It came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. In that day Yahweh made a covenant with Abram, saying, I have given this land to your offspring, from the river of Egypt to the great river of the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Kadmonites, the Hittites, the Pezerites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. Well, one thing is for sure when reading the Bible, you don't have to wait long for a big old fish to come along and snap up the bait on your plot hook. This certainly sets up some themes and patterns for the rest of this story, doesn't it? I have some channel recommendations for you, and a few scattered throughout. First is Jake W. for his Abraham, Sarai, Sarah cartoons. They are hilarious. And Justin from Esoterica for a good understanding of what the early religion was like as the Hebrews/Israelites were separating themselves out from the parent group of the Canaanites. History of the text. Authorship, date, location. Was it Moses? No, it was not Moses. He's just the pen name. So J, or the Yahweh source, is responsible for the bulk of chapter 12, with P, or the priestly source, joining in a little. J also wrote 13, with a short appearance of the Elohist for the first time. Welcome, E. Do not be afraid and fear thy Lord are both E. E is very contrariwise that way. All right. Chapter 14 is a bit of an outlier here. It was likely written in the late Persian or Hellenistic period, somewhere between like the 400s and the 100s BCE, and inserted later. It makes Abram more of a heroic character versus a friendly hippie character, and it uses names for locations that weren't used when J and E were writing. Chapter 15 is usually attributed to E plus the redactors, as E is highly fragmentary. E is big on visions and dreams, goes in heavy on the promised land, and really enjoys the drama of fear. So anytime you're seeing fear in the Pentateuch, that's probably E chipping in. E also loves to play up the northern region of Israel. The documentary hypothesis is constantly being discussed, and as I said, I am not a biblical scholar. I'm just going by the easily available information online. While I think that authorship is important for context on so many levels, we, the modern layman reader, when I say we, I'm one of those, must deal with the text as it is presented today. So while I find this incredibly interesting, what actually matters in telling the story is the final edit as it's presented to us. Literary analysis. I am breaking these down by chapters because as I read these stories, they're like little stage plays in my head. And these 4 chapters, even though they carry through the story of Abram, are so different from one another that they really need to be separated out from each other. We're going to do the setting in one broad time frame. So it starts sometime between 2091 and 1941 BCE, when Abram is 75 years old. Abram's birth is anywhere between 2166 and 1996 BCE, according to the various internet sources. And Ishmael was born when Abram was 86. So all of these chapters happen within a 10-year time frame. Interestingly, Answers in Genesis, which is young earth creationism, puts these events 1 year after the Tower of Babel, which just blows my mind. Okay, where does this happen? Our scene opens in Haran, which is in modern-day Turkey, down to Canaan, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Israel, okay, into Egypt, and then back up through the various locations in Canaan. Characters in order of appearance. In chapter 12, we have Yahweh and Abram in speaking roles. Abram is 75 years old at this time. We have Lot and Sarai, plus their people they acquired in Haran. We have the Canaanites mentioned en masse, Egyptians mentioned en masse, the princes of Pharaoh, Pharaoh himself, who is in a speaking role, and Pharaoh's men. In chapter 13, we have Abram in a speaking role, Sarai, everyone with him, Lot's people, specifically the herdsmen of both of them, Canaanites, the Perizzites, I'm probably saying that wrong, Yahweh in a speaking role, and the men of Sodom sort of mentioned offstage. In chapter 14, we have the kings of Shinar. I'm going to butcher their names again because I did not put the pronunciations down here like I should have. We have Amphrael, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, or Kedor Laomer, king of Elam, Tittle or Title. I've seen both, and I've also seen Tuttle. But anyway, we're going to go with Title, king of Goim. And then you have the kings of Canaan. Bera, king of Sodom, actually talks. Birsha, king of Gomorrah. Shinab, king of Admah. Shemember, king of Zeboim. And then you have the king of Bela, or Zoar, who doesn't get a name. Other people are mentioned as people who are being attacked. So we have the Rephaim, the Zuzim, the Emim, the Horites, the Amalekites, and the Amorites. We have our escaped POW, who in theory speaks, but he doesn't have like quotations around what he says. Abram actually speaks. And then we have his friends Eshcol, Anar, and Mamre the Amorite, and note that Mamre is both the place name and the man's name. We have 318 trained fighting men. Melchizedek, who is the king of Salem / priest of God Most High. He's in a speaking role. And then chapter 15, we have Adonai / Yahweh / Elohim. So sometimes it's Elohim Yahweh or Elohim Adonai. I know that Yahweh and Adonai are supposed to be the same. It depends on the translation that you're using, how they actually put it. Anyway, he speaks in chapter 15. Abram speaks. And then all of the rest of these people, they do not say anything. We have Eleazar of Damascus, the 3-year-old heifer, the 3-year-old she-goat, the 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, a young pigeon, multiple birds of prey, amorphous mentioned descendants who don't actually have to appear because they don't exist yet. And then we have a list of people who are sort of mentioned but off stage. We have the Amorites, the Kenatites, the Kenizzites, I don't know, the Catammonites, the Hittites, the Pezerites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. Yeah. Fun. So much fun to say these names. One thing that I did learn is that when I see the CH, instead of saying ch, I need to be saying k. CH has 3 sounds that it makes, which is like a little engine going up the hill is ch, k, sh, okay? And most of these names, when you see the CH, it's going to say k. Point of view. This is so much fun. Chapter 12 is told in the third-person objective point of view, which tells what the characters say and do, but not how they feel. It is the police report of narrative styles. Just the facts, ma'am. In chapter 13, it is a third-person narrative falling somewhere between objective and limited. And it's really only limited in like a couple verses, where in verse 10 it offers insight into Lot's thoughts about the plain of the Jordan, though he never speaks directly. He gets no quotation marks here. He gets quotation marks later in the story. In chapter 14, it's again told from the third-person objective, only telling what people said or did, with a historical, like it's edging towards it, but not quite blow-by-blow style. In chapter 15, it moves to the third-person limited, describing what Yahweh and Abram say and do, but also how Abram feels. It takes place within a dream or vision, blurring the lines between imagination and reality. Plot summary. In chapter 12, Yahweh tells Abram he is the man, and to go out and see the world. So Abe packs up the wife and nephew and all their posses, and they head off down to Canaan with God's promises of many rugrats ringing in his ears. Abram stacks some stones in Shechem and on a mountain east of Bethel, and then there's nothing to eat around here. So they all head down to Egypt, where the food is actually good. Abram tells Sarai to say she's his hot sister so he doesn't get beaten up. Pharaoh takes a shine to the pretty lady and gives her brother a bunch of livestock and slaves, giggity. And then something goes wrong, and he figures out what happened and boots the whole company out of Egypt. In chapter 13, they come out of Egypt into Canaan far richer than when they left. That's a theme, a broad idea, deeper meaning, or underlying message of the story. Themes can be explicit, implicit, or require interpretation. They all head back up to that nice campsite they liked between Bethel and Ai, but there are too many sheep now. So Abram and Lot agree to take separate vacations, and Lot heads off to the lush plain of the Jordan down by Sodom, not known for its hospitality. Yahweh again promises Abram land and progeny, and they camp under some very nice oak trees in Hebron. In chapter 14, there's a battle of 9 kings, a sticky situation, and Lot gets kidnapped in the kerfuffle. Abram takes 318 real tough dudes and rides off to the rescue as soon as he hears about it. He does a sneaky night attack, kicks the king's name I can't say into the afterlife, and returns with all the loot and the lot. The king of Sodom meets up with him, and so does the king of Salem, peace, Jerusalem, Melchizedek, who does the bread, wine, blessing thing. That's another theme. And Abram gives him 10%, etiology for tithing. King Bera wants his people back and tells Abram to keep the loot. Abram says, wouldn't dream of it, and make sure that everyone gets where they want to go. In chapter 15, Abram has one heck of a dream where Elohim, Adonai, Yahweh, again promises him a passel of kids, but he questions the promise that hasn't happened yet, despite trying to graft Pharaoh onto the family tree. He does some stargazing with God, and then God wants a big old barbecue. Abram obliges, then has to chase off some buzzards. After all of this butchering and scarecrowing, he falls asleep. He has a nightmare about his descendants being slaves for 400 years, and God promises his friends land to them. A smoking furnace and a flaming torch pass between the meaty pieces, sealing the deal, and the Y-Man sets some big boundaries for his future promise. Can you say breach of contract? More on that later. Literary devices! We have a cornucopia of themes. A theme is an idea that recurs in or pervades a work of art or literature. So be on the lookout for more of these as they come up. The main theme is the promised land. The next is the promise of many babies, which touches on trust and not trying to force things and not screwing up God's domesticated human breeding program, and boy will we get into that next time. We also have a continuation of God's chosen screw-ups, or rather, God's chosen screws up, either way, but that's kind of baked in. A minor theme is out of Egypt. That will happen several times in the rest of the Bible, wherein each time the person flees to Egypt, endures some kind of hardship, and then returns to Canaan even richer. We are going to have a shorter comparative mythology section today. I'm not going to do any readings here, but I am going to touch on some common themes, and you can compare and contrast with the tale of Abram's close family road trip on your own if you want. For the half-brother, half-sister union, we have Morgase and Arthur from the Arthurian legends. Their son and nephew Mordred eventually destroys Arthur's kingdom. Mordred's conception was the result of a Beltane ritual, and therefore he was a child born of the gods. While the tales vary, the two either did not know who the other was when they entered into the ritual, or didn't know their true relationship at the time. For the marriage of deception, we have a Greek tale about Zeus disguising himself as Alcmene's husband, Amphitryon, to seduce her, and thus Hercules was born, and Hera is, of course, livid. We can always count on Zeus to be there for the extramarital, sneaky, kinky sex stuff. In the fairy tale Hansel and Gretel, the children are led on a journey to a new land away from their family, lured into a gingerbread house with the promise of a good life, and then kidnapped or captured. And Gretel uses a trick, much like Abram attacking at night, to defeat the witch and rescue her younger male relative. They both arrive safely at home, richer than when they left. Conflicts, contradictions, and controversies. So, there's not a whole lot here, but what there is kind of interesting. We have some conflicting information within the text. In chapter 14, verse 14, it says that Abram pursued as far as Dan. If the text were written by Moses, which it was not, he would have called the city Laish. It wasn't renamed Dan until the 12th century BCE, as told in Judges 18. While this is not an argument for a Hellenistic origin for chapter 14, which is totally beyond the scope of my current understanding and has to do with linguistics of ancient languages that I don't speak, it is an argument against Moses' authorship. Very briefly, I want to mention the different interpretations of Abram's encounter with Melchizedek, the king of Salem, Salem meaning peace, that being the city of Jerusalem, which is why the city of Jerusalem is the city of peace. in chapter 14, verses 18 to 20. There are two tracts taken here by different Christian denominations. The first and most common is that Priest King Mel is a symbolic precursor of David, Solomon, Jesus. We have the King of Peace, we have the bread and wine, and we have the blessing of God Most High, and we get an etiology for 10% tithing. This interpretation favors the late writing and edited in hypothesis, which still predates the New Testament. From Hebrews, which is in the New Testament, which is looking back on earlier Old Testament writings for that symbolism and ties it in with New Testament theology. We can call that prophecy for funsies if you really want. The second interpretation is that Abram accepting this blessing and paying the tithe to Priest King Mel was actually an act of worship to El and was counted as a sin by Yahweh, therefore delaying his promises and causing the 400 years of slavery thing. Not that my opinion here matters much, but I think it's actually a combination of the two, with one foot in the Bible and one foot in the real world and the actual historic practice of the Canaanite religion, which the Israelites were part of. El was the father of Yahweh, and Yahweh inherited the Israelites as his people. By accepting the blessing of Big Daddy El, Abram may have annoyed Yahweh a little, though the text does not say that, so there's no reason to actually think that. What can be done with the text is to use these passages to help unify El, or God Most High, with Yahweh, allowing Yahweh to edge El out as top god in the region. If this part of the story was written in the post-exilic period or the Hellenistic period, that would fit with the political and religious goals of the time, like, yay, Jerusalem. If it was written along with the other parts of the story in the 900s to 800s, it is just a reference to El as a legit god. Priest King Mel shows up in Psalms and then again in Hebrews. And if you want more information here on YouTube, please go see the channel Bible Class for the video Melchizedek Explained Genesis 14. He does a really decent job of outlining the character and the later Jesus connection. He also touches on the Shem connection. So that's fun. You should do that. We have some controversies. Patriarch versus patriarchy. Okay? Let's start by defining our terms so that we have a firm foundation here. A patriarch is the male head of a family or tribe. Any of those biblical figures regarded as the fathers of the human race, especially Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their forefathers or the sons of Jacob. So the main patriarchs would be like Adam, Seth, Noah, Abram / Abraham, etc., etc., okay? Anybody who's Moses is a patriarch, okay? So any of the main male characters in the Pentateuch are patriarchs. Patriarchy is a system of society or government in which the father or eldest male is head of the family and descent is traced through the male line. It is also a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. We need to talk about both of these, or all of these, with Abram. I will resist skipping ahead to Hagar because that's for next time. So, keeping it right here in these 4 chapters, let's talk about Abram's character. What do we know about Abram? Let's start with the good, because there's a lot of good here. He's kind of cool, right? This dude is chill. He's like the most laid-back, peace on earth, let's all just get along, happy hippie camper. He's the chillest of chill dudes. He is well-liked everywhere they go. Abram is a good manager of livestock and people. He's a fine negotiator. He's loyal to his family at this point. And he rescues Lot when Lot is taken prisoner. He's a good warrior and strategist. He's fair and equitable. And on the religious end, he does what God tells him to do. He's devoted. He's also not afraid to call God out on his divine bullshit about the kids and the land. The man is in his 80s at that point, and he has every right to do so. There's more good to come later, but I will resist talking about it for now. Now, let's talk about the bad, or potential bad. In chapter 12, because the text is silent about how Sarai feels about this, and her feelings are critically important here. Note that I did not read any of the midrashes about this, so I'm sure there's more info. I'm just reacting to the text as presented in the Bible, okay? Chapter 12, verse 10 to 20 can be taken a few ways. This is the story about them going down into Egypt and him saying this, the whole say you're my sister thing, right? We'll go least bad to most bad. First, if Sarai was fine with this plan, from a modern perspective, the only wrongdoing here would have been not informing Pharaoh that she was married. Being poly is fine. But you have to be honest, otherwise it's cheating, and cheating is not cool. I'm not poly, this is just what my friends who are have told me, and we all know that cheating is harmful. It's possible that both Abram and Sarai were motivated by the thought of a late-life child in this situation. Nothing wrong with using a sperm donor, just get the consent of the sperm donor first, otherwise it's also kind of kidnapping, right? So in this version, it's only Pharaoh who is wronged. And if we go with the STI theory, the rest of his household, because you have to be honest about those things, folks. Taking Abram's character into account, this is also a strategy that will result in the fewest deaths and the least conflict. And he's really good at that. So it's not a great situation, but it's not exactly criminal either. In the second option, Sarai is not down with this plan, did not consent to being pimped out by her brother husband, but she had no other option given the situation she was in. In this case, Sarai and Pharaoh are both victims here. She of social circumstances and the bad kind of patriarchy, and he and his entire house of being lied to about their relationship status, plus being basically robbed of a hefty bride price. In this situation, Abram holds all of the guilt because he's the only one that has consented to any of this, so therefore he is clearly the bad guy. In the third scenario, the worst all around, we assume that Abram's assessment of the Egyptians was correct. They would have killed him for Sarai, and so he pimps her out in exchange for livestock and a safe residence. She's not okay with it, but goes along because she has no choice, and there are economic benefits, which brings in an element of greed on her part, which leaves Pharaoh as the deceived but not exactly innocent party here. All three are in various degrees of wrong. Hovering over all of them is Yahweh God, gleefully doling out afflictions for unknowing sins, but not to the one person responsible for the wrongdoing in all three scenarios, which is Abram. On the Christian end of things, this is about not trusting God completely, and it is considered one of Abram's failings. On the secular end of things, this is both a case of victims of circumstances and the bad side of patriarchy, where men hold the power and women are treated as livestock to be bought and sold and traded without any consideration of their feelings or agency as people. I talked at length about Noah cursing Canaan last time, and here we see that slavery is in full swing. I'm not going to address it this time. I will address it next time. I just want you to know that I'm not ignoring it. This is the last one. There is not exactly a controversy here that I'm aware of, but there is an element of unfairness that I want to address and explain why this isn't just some weird dream, that it's important. So chapter 15 and... Chapter 15 in the flaming bifurcated livestock fever dream. Keep in mind, this is the first time we are seeing the Elohist at work, so things are about to get trippy here. So, Lord Elohim Adonai Yahweh comes to Abram in a dream or vision, and Abram is like, where are all the kids and land you promised me? Are you going to pay up or not, man? Because Abe has balls of steel when it comes to talking to God. And then God takes Abram outside, either for real or in the dream, and is like, a lot of stars up there. You know what this deal needs? This deal needs barbecue. And then we get this odd laying out of the halves of the animals, except for the birds, which is important. Now, here's the very real historic context of this ritual. In Canaan, there was a way of signing a contract or swearing an oath where the parties would sacrifice and divide animals in half, lay the halves on either side of a path, and walk between the halves. This meant that if they broke the oath, they'd be divided in half like the animals. It's literally a blood oath. Abram does not divide the birds. If this is a mistake or on purpose is disagreed upon between the different denominations, but the interpretation that I prefer is that the birds represent the divine, which cannot be divided. So then Abram either falls asleep again for real, or he falls asleep in his vision, and the smoking furnace and flaming torch pass between the pieces, symbolizing that God swears an oath about the children in the land. And 400 years of slavery? Like, what? But here's the catch. The birds were divided. The birds represent God. God suffers no consequences if he doesn't keep this oath. Questions! What literary elements did I miss because I only talked about one? Drop them in the comments below. How do you think Sarai felt about what happened to her in Egypt? The text doesn't say. What do you think of Abram's character in the story so far? What do you find interesting in these 4 chapters? I want to thank you so much for joining me on the Secular Scriptures today. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. I hope you'll join me next time for Genesis chapters 16 through 18, verse 15. They've got the baby blues.